Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Tiffany.
To some, we could be called career wizards.
And to others, sometimes we seem like therapists. However, we definitely are not.
But for you, we are the co-hosts of the Career Boosters podcast. Hey, hello, and welcome to the Career Boosters podcast, episode 2 of season 2. The second time people get to see us, and I don't know how I feel about this yet. So, my name is Paul, and
I'm Tiffany.
And today we get to welcome a fabulous guest, Lyndsay Stewart. And so MBA students have kind of two major moments in their MBA program: when they transition to become an MBA student, and then when they leave the MBA program. In episode 1, we focused on coming into orientation and being prepared and what that kind of looks like. And now we're going to talk with just one of my favorite MBA students and a grad of our program about her experience transitioning out into the working world. And before we were having this, the recorded version, she reminded me I did 6 credits at the very end. I was kind of part-time and so, but still transitioning out of the MBA and being an MBA student. So, Lyndsay Stewart, thank you so much for joining us. An advocate of women in sports, an amazing strategic mind and teammate, a manager at the GOA, and maybe the toughest and most rewarding job of all, a mom of 3 little people. So, Lyndsay, thank you so much for joining us, and I get to start with the first question. How do you think your MBA will impact the next phase of your career?
I think for me, my MBA, well, first of all, was actually really critical to me getting the job I'm currently in. I don't necessarily think that I couldn't have done this job, before getting my MBA, but I think it was really critical into me actually getting the job and getting noticed and getting through, getting screened in, honestly. So I think that on its own was really helpful for me. How it impacts the next phase of my career, I think, going through my MBA, I think part of going through your MBA is you spend a lot of time doing a lot of things that you have to take a lot of courses. You have to take some courses that you might not have as much interest in. You take courses that you are interested in, and I think how it impacted it helped me refine what I am really interested in. So I think that's how I see my MBA experience really, how it's going to impact the next part of my career. Is I think it really helped me realize what I really am interested in, and what I want to spend more time doing. And I think I'm trying to, as I'm looking at job applications or I'm looking at what's the next move after this, I'm trying to remind myself of some of the different things I got to do during my MBA that I was really interested in. And I'm trying to keep that top of mind as I'm looking at, other jobs and what the next step in my career is. So I think that's an interesting thing that you get to do during your MBA because, when you're working full time, you spend so much time doing the same things. And when you're doing MBA, you get to try a little bit of everything. And it kind of opens up the door to things like, oh, I actually didn't realize I'm good at that, or I'm super interested in that. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing, that it's kind of opened my eyes to some things that I think I'm really good at or interested in, and I want to spend more time in. So I think that's probably one of the biggest ways that my MBA is going to impact the next part of my career.
And what I find really interesting in what you just said is we're here to chat a little bit about transition. The MBA itself is a big transition, transitioning in, transitioning out, which is kind of the frame you have right now. But what I heard you say is that your MBA is actually a tool to help you with future transitions
Hmm.
and micro transitions that perhaps you had in the MBA. That it's
Hmm.
not just a transition to be in the MBA, but having one and the experience of it is a tool to use
Hmm.
as you're
Hmm.
transitioning into different things or considering different pieces.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering if we can start off there and if we can get a bit of an idea of your lens on transitioning out of the MBA. So you certainly did the transitioning in, and we've got students coming in starting with us this week, but we also have a cohort of students, of which you're part of, that transitioned out in this last little while. What has this change now been like for you?
I think this is a unique one for me. Probably because, as Paul mentioned, I am a mom of three. So what's interesting, and I've actually had this conversation with other moms, because that's kind of the cool thing that you get to do in your MBA, is meet other people who are in the exact same situations as you. Um, and there's another mom who had graduated a couple years ago, And I asked her, like, how was it for you when you finished? And she said she actually found it really hard transitioning out. And what she found hard about it is that if you think about the type of person that does their MBA while working with kids, you're probably someone who has a hard time like just slowing down and not taking on the next thing. And we said it was really interesting because, she had to talk to a lot of people and how to stop herself from starting something new. So just sort of being kind of reflecting on your MBA experience and the things that you did learn and just be for a little bit, I think that's how you get a lot out of the program. You sort of reflect on like what you did, what you learned, and just being a little more present because I already found myself like looking up the next, like I really want to do my project management and like my PMP. And I've had to stop myself because it's like, no, just be for a little bit, you know? And I think the type of personality that goes into an MBA or any kind of graduate program while working, and especially working parents, like I shouldn't just say working moms, there are a lot of dads who are in the same situation. And I think transitioning out, one of the difficult things for me has been to just be for a little bit and like kind of take it in, reflect on everything we did, everything I did, maybe focus a little bit on other things in our life. And then after you've kind of had that pause, like to not just jump into the next thing, really be thoughtful about what you're going to do next. I think it's about taking time for yourself and reflecting on the experience, but also being mindful about what you're going to do next. So that's something that I've spoken to a lot of, especially parents who've been like, actually, the hardest thing for me has been not starting something new to like fill that gap that is left when we're done our MBA part-time courses. So yeah.
I have two questions for you about that, Lyndsay. One is where do you think that comes from, that like innate wanting to really drive and do more? And then the second follow-up question, and I know as coaches we're not supposed to layer questions, but I'm going to. How do you stop yourself? How do you balance yourself?
Okay. So for your first question, we've had many conversations about this, Paul. So I'm wondering if this is where why to ask this question is um I think another thing in my MBA or that I've done over this past few years is that introspection. And I think we do this. I've always accepted that I just am the way I am. So one thing that I am is that I'm a perfectionist. And I think I just accepted like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. Like I was born this way. This is who I am. And then especially through a lot of my conversations with Paul, where he, and through I remember we did this at orientation, was why don't you think about like some of the major things that sort of make up who you are or that you've done over your life, like how they have contributed to why you are the way you are. And that sounds really obvious now, but um I started thinking, I was a competitive athlete my whole life. So perfectionism is sort of drilled into you when you're a competitive athlete. Um, failure is like there's a lot of if you fail to perform at your highest level, you are going to fail. You're going to be cut. You're not going to get that scholarship. You're not going to get to start the game. That like there's. So I started thinking about um, what has I think there was a little bit of me that I probably was born a perfectionist, a tendency to be that way. But there's a lot of how I grew up and what took up a lot of my time growing up that kind of shaped who I am today. So I think that's part of why I am that way. It's just like my nature to want to consistently need to or constantly be productive and like, okay, what am I achieving next? So I think partly who I am is just that's just who I am. But then also when you're grow up as a competitive athlete, it's always what's next. Like what's the next level I can get to? And it's hard to turn that off. So that I guess leads me to the next question. How do I turn that off? And I think one, you just do. So you like acknowledge that you're doing this thing. So I think I've created awareness of like that's first step is I'm aware of it now. I'm like, oh, you're doing that thing where like, do you actually want to do this? Like, is this actually a good idea? Is this where you should spend your time? Is this right for you, with everything going on in your life? And then if yes, then okay, then do it. But if I'm not really sure, then it's like, oh, I think you're just doing that thing you do where you like have to start the next thing. So I think that's a bit of awareness and like really intentional pausing before I start something else. And then I think maybe setting up some accountability. So I'll talk, and again, like my best friend, who Paul knows, she's someone like she knows me through and through. And so I will literally tell her, and then she will force me. It's like an accountability partner. Like she will force me and say, okay, I'm pausing you. Like, are you doing this because you actually want to do this? Or are you doing that thing where you have to start something new because you finished and you have this constant need to like, okay, what's next? What am I going to achieve next? So I think it's like awareness, pausing, and then maybe setting up someone who keeps you accountable. So yeah, I guess that's how I'd answer those questions.
As I hear you talk, what I see in my mind is like centrifugal force. You're going at a speed that has this centrifugal force, and you want to keep it going. I want to keep the
Yeah.
next thing to keep the speed going, and that this awareness to have you actually pause. If you think about centrifugal force, when you start to slow it down, it wants to keep going. And so I'm curious, as your centrifugal force has been slowing down a bit in the last little while, and you are acknowledging it and recognizing it, what is it actually now creating space for now that you aren't maybe grabbing onto the next thing right away?
I think it's creating space for, this is another thing that I had, during my MBA, I realized there was kind of 4 things. Maybe Paul and I had this conversation. I might be taking credit for this, but it's kind of like 4 things in my life. There's family, career, health, and social. Those are kind of the 4 things. It's either you who told me that or Brene Brown, Paul. I don't know. You were the 2 people that I got this
Really,
information from.
two in the same. Really, I don't.
2 in the same. Yeah,
Yeah,
you and Brene Brown.
yeah.
So I think I realized during my MBA that even though those 4 things are super important to me, like health and fitness, like working out is really important to me. And social, like I'm not a super social person, but I do still have a social, I guess, need and to do social things. I realized like those had to take a bit of a back seat because at the career and family buckets were taking up a lot more of their, the piece of the pie kind of thing. And that was okay for that period. So I think now that I've like forced that pause, I have been able to balance those 4 things a bit more. Because it was easier for me just to continue on with kind of the career. When I say career, it's like anything that I'm doing that's related to my career or work life, was taking up so much. And as I've kind of pulled back a little bit on that, it's allowed me to use or allocate, I guess, more of that pie to the other things. So I think that's what I've noticed by pausing.
Nice.
And I
When
don't think
I
it's the end. Like I'll do that. That balance will continue
Yeah.
again. But anyway, sorry I cut you off there, Paul.
No, that's okay. I think it's really important, and I think through the introspective journey that you went through, you started to identify the things that really matter to you and the things that really are meaningful to you. And I think when we look at it, our core values are things that we can really start to identify, and these are the foundational pieces of who we are. And you're just allocating the right amount of space and time to all of those things. And yeah, some of them are going to fluctuate and go like that, but I think it's important to be able to be just aware of them first and foremost, because if you're not, you're just going to continue on with like what Tiffany said, the centrifugal force, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about your MBA, what was the highlight of your MBA journey?
I guess trying to think of how to best answer this. There's an event or something in my MBA. There's a couple that were highlights for me. So I guess I'll start with that, and then maybe the other way I'll answer that is kind of like what was a big, huge takeaway for me from my MBA. But so in terms of, 2 big kind of events, things I got to do as part of my MBA, I got to be part of this, as you mentioned in your intro, I'm super passionate about women and, whether it's women in sport or women in business. So I got to be part of I think it was women in business, women of the MBA kind of committee. And so I was kind of the student rep for that. And we got to this one night where there was, we had a panel of speakers for this, and they asked me to be the moderator. And I was first like, oh, like little old me, you want me to be the moderator? Cool. So that was exciting. I think there was also a part of me that had imposter syndrome. I was like, no, like, that's a pretty cool panel. Why do you want me to do this? But then being like, no, you've been asked, like, stop with the imposter syndrome. And it was such a great evening. It was, there was so much energy in the room, and it really aligned with my core values. I get super energized by having like being in a room full of women like that. And it was a really positive, it wasn't this thing where everyone's just complaining. Like it was a really positive experience. And it was, the type of panel event where you have to cut people's questions off because you're like, no, it's 9 p.m. Like people have to leave. Like I have to cut you off. And so that was really cool. Like that was a highlight for me. And I know, I wouldn't have gotten to do that had I not been in the MBA program. So that was a cool one. The other one was something I got to go to that probably might remember, the Global Business Forum. And again, I think that was probably another silly imposter syndrome moment where it's just one MBA that gets nominated to go. And they asked me, and I think I emailed Paul right after. I was like, oh my God, they asked me to do it. And Paul was like, yeah, like, of course they did. And so that was really cool getting to do, again, like something that I wouldn't have gotten to do if I wasn't in the MBA program, if I hadn't kind of showed up to the MBA program in the way that I did. And that was really cool. It was just an event where you got to go listen to some really cool talks, kind of rub shoulders with some cool people. I had to stand up on stage and like not present, like I had to speak for like, I don't know, a couple minutes, but to like, 400 people or something. So that was cool. It was like a little stepping outside my comfort zone. That's kind of what the MBA is about. I remember Paul's elastic speech, which I still keep it in the back of my mind. So I guess those are two like huge highlights. I think the other kind of highlight for me in my MBA is not to be like cliche, but it's like I can do really hard things. Like I think that was really hard. And I don't actually think that I believed I could complete it when I started, mainly because there was so much going on in my life. So I think that was the biggest thing, is like there were so many moments where I was faced with like some really hard things, and I did them. And I think it was a huge confidence builder for me, for sure.
And I want to point out this kind of continual myth that we've been busting over season 1, but for sure now in the first 2 episodes, is that imposter syndrome feeling like, why have I been asked to do this? Feeling like I'm not so sure I can do this is not a just you experience. It's a shared experience. It doesn't matter what student we're talking to, how experienced they are, how confident they seem. Everyone is struggling with that at some point in their MBA, which you've just highlighted again.
Yeah.
And I want to point out that your highlights were extracurricular things. We're not talking about stuff in class, extracurricular activities, of which I know you did a lot. You've had a lot going on in your MBA. Can you speak to, let's go back to balance, but let's speak specifically to parents. It's not an audience that we actually have really talked a lot about in the podcast. So you've got 3 littles also that you're raising along here. Talk to other parents that are maybe coming into this or going through it. How did you do this balance?
Yeah, that was again probably the biggest I guess lesson or skill I developed in my MBA, probably because you have no choice but to figure it out, because you can't do it. And so I talked a bit earlier about how I'm a perfectionist. So I think the biggest thing for me was learning when to let go of something. So there just isn't, when you're a student, when you're a full-time student and you're not doing anything but studying, that's not to put anyone down who's doing that, but you just have a different amount of time and mental space. So like actual time, and then just, space in your brain to give towards the stuff. So I think one of the ways, one of my strategies was I had to really work on my perfectionism. So I had to really learn when something needed to be let go. I got caught a little bit earlier. It'd be like 2 a.m. and I was still working on something. And I realized I was like wordsmithing the last 2 sentences of a paper. And it's like, this is not that important. So I think you're sort of trained to care. And again, that's a perfectionist in me, but we also train people and condition people through regular, academics to like perfect the last 2 sentences. And there's sort of this concept that, the 80-20 principle, and I'm going to butcher it, but the way I would think about it is basically like, this is not worth the input right now, because the output from this additional work is so little. So I think that was one way I started to I got caught, and most parents starting the program, like, you will get caught. It's inevitable. Like, you will get caught in this, and you figure it out. And then learning and really starting to better gauge like where my time is most valuable, and spending 30 minutes at midnight wordsmithing your conclusion paragraph is not actually a good, like you have such finite resources, and that's not a good place to put it. So I think learning when to let go. Someone told me they use the good enough, move on. So they would, that I thought about it like 80/20. Is this worth my input? Like, is the output I'm getting out of this worth my input? And then other people would just say, good enough, move on. It's like next. So that was one way. And then I think the other way is, that what I brought up about the four, the social, health, family, and career. When you're doing, if you have a family, especially if you have a family, if you're working and you're doing this, MBA part-time, like it's just a season of your life where you will probably just have to, social life is going to just fall lower on the totem pole, and you're not going to allocate very much. And that's okay. You just have to be okay with it. Or you choose which one is most important to you. And then you have to, like, you only have so much of that to go around. So you just have to allocate those four things. And that's just how you deal with it. And then I think the third thing I'd say is like, you have to be really comfortable setting boundaries. And that was something I had to learn, especially with social stuff, because I didn't want to say no. I felt bad. I felt obligated. You feel like you owe people your time, and you just have to be comfortable setting boundaries, and then being okay with people maybe being upset with you. But so boundaries, letting go, like understanding when it's good enough to move on, I think were the two biggest ones for me.
Well, and we talk about this, and I think everybody struggles with this. How do I say no to something that I really want to do, right? And you just have an amount of time it's not possible to do everything. So I feel like we could have Lyndsay on for like 3 shows, and we could have like lots of best practices, but we're getting towards kind of the end of our time for today. But I'm going to ask one more question before Tiffany jumps into the lightning round questions. So you've gone through so much in the last 2 to 3 years, right? With an MBA, with kids growing up, with work and full-time roles. What's one piece of advice that you would give, maybe specifically to second-year students that are going to transition out in June of 2025, right? What kind of advice would you give to those people that are finishing up their MBA and they're transitioning out of the program?
I think I'd say try and be present as much as possible. Because again, we have this tendency to think about what's next, especially someone who's finishing their MBA. Like that is, the whole what's next, like what internship am I gonna get? What job am I gonna get? You have to think about those things. But like your MBA, when it's over, it's over. So just try, you need to set yourself up. You've got to plan for the future and stuff. And that's all important, but try as much as possible to just be present as much for those final kind of classes, because once it's over, it's over. So I think that's one thing that I probably could have done a better job of. So hindsight, I wish I would have been a little bit more present, little less multitasking during those final classes, just like take it in. I think that's one. And then I think, what we touched on earlier is like just to pause a little bit after. So don't do that thing where you start the next thing as quickly as possible, because I think pause for a little bit, take some time for yourself. It's been a lot. It's been super busy. Pausing is not actually, not being productive or not. It's actually important to pause and kind of look back at what you did and celebrate it, and just be really mindful about what you do next. So I think being present and just like pausing and celebrating what you did would be my 2 pieces of advice.
And I think knowing MBA students, as Paul and I do, that is advice that every single one will resonate with, or should, if they haven't perhaps thought of it. So thank you for that. Really valuable. All right, ready for a lightning round?
I think so. Yeah.
Let's do it. 3 quick questions, 3 gut answers. Okay. What part of your career story has given you the biggest boost?
I think just coming in and this last job where I had a lot of I didn't really think I was going to get it, and then I got it, and then I hit the ground running. I think that was a big confidence booster or a good, like, yeah, see, you did have it. Like you did, you were qualified. Imposter syndrome, like you should have had it. So I think that was a big realization, and I'll take that with me into all my next jobs, because I'm going to have that imposter syndrome, and I've now proven to myself that it's wrong. So I don't know if that quite answers exactly what you're looking for, but that's my answer.
And it certainly leads into the next one. What's one thing you wish you had learned sooner?
uh, I think still the perfectionism thing, like the good enough move on, like knowing when to let something go, like that is going to be a battle for the rest of my life. And I think every time I take something on new, I struggle with it. So if I could do that more efficiently, that would really help me.
Right. And for Paul and I, service is just such a key part of who we are. So we're always curious to hear how service is going to show up for you in the coming week.
I think for me, that's a tricky one for a mom because I think we're like, how do you stop serving everyone else but yourself? But for me is again, as parents, we spend so much time, especially multiple kids, with the kids. So service for me is going to be how am I going to be present and show up for my partner over the next couple of weeks? Like how am I going to make genuine space to show up for him in the next few weeks?
Yeah, real talk.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Paul. Got a Paul's favorite question?
I have so many, but I am going to ask one, and I want to tie it to what when we are introducing Lyndsay to kind of an audience of however many people. It's women in sports and an advocate for women in sports. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think parents, what do you think coaches, what do you think people just in general need to do to get more girls, more women playing more sports?
I think it's a hard one. So loaded. Um, I think first of all, let girls choose what they want to do. I think there's too much pressure for them to do certain things or be certain ways. So I think be very open to watching what they genuinely want to do, and then just encourage that and kind of make space for them. Like set the conditions for them to thrive in that. Don't force them to be in certain things. I think that probably goes for all kids, not just girls. I think the other thing is um, we condition young girls to be nice and make everyone else comfortable and don't show too much emotion because it's going to make others uncomfortable. You need to be nice. Nobody, we do those things. So I think just they need to be just who they are. So whether that is someone who wants to be nice and make everyone comfortable, that's fine. They can be whatever they want. I think it's just be what you want to be and who you want to be and do without thinking about what you're supposed to be. So that's the biggest thing that I try and remind myself is, I'm talking to my girls, just be they don't have to be anyone at all. If they want to be only in dance and wear pink and do all those things because that's what they want, that's fine. If they want to do and be these into hardcore sports and kind of rough and tumble, that's also okay, as long as they're making the decision for themselves and they're not doing it because they feel like they're supposed to be something. So I think letting girls just make decisions without this idea in their head of who they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to make other people feel, like that's the biggest thing that we need to do for girls. Just let them be.
Can you imagine the world we would live in if that were the case?
Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Mm.
Lyndsay, and that's actually a word that comes to mind as I think about this conversation, is that I really appreciate how inspiring you are, but from a real perspective. So we as in coaches, I got to watch a little bit of your journey for sure. Paul knows you a lot more, but we've watched a very robust, full journey, and you have been inspiring to many, but inspiring because you're willing to talk about things like being a perfectionist, not being able to turn it off, struggling with the balance, right? Knowing you're going to drop a ball. That is real. Those are real struggles that MBA students deal with throughout their MBA, and the fact that transitioning out is hard. Thank you for normalizing that. Thank you for being inspiring within that. Thank you for the nuggets that you have offered on perhaps how to deal with that and approach that, because I think many MBA students and other people kind of that will be able to see themselves in you will be able to see themselves in some of those tips and tricks. And so thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and being so inspiring.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome. So much fun.
Awesome. So many of our guests, there are so many key takeaways and nuggets that we could talk about, but we are going to pick one each. And my takeaway from Lyndsay's conversation, and she called it her 80-20 rule. And what came to mind for me was the law of diminishing returns and how that relates to energy management, and that's in our control. And so if we are feeling overwhelmed, if we're struggling with balance, to really take a peek and figure out if our input is worth the output and what can we control within that and how can that impact our own energy management. That was a big takeaway for me. Paul, how about you?
Cool. That's really wonderful. I feel like it's really hard to pick one. So I think the power of introspection, and more specifically, giving yourself space for introspection. We had a really interesting, just off the cuff dialogue after we let Lyndsay go, and it was around just allowing yourself the space to come up with the answers that you needed to. That could be with a coach. It could be on your own. It could be using ChatGPT to ask you some questions about introspection. But you are going to hear us talk about this pretty much in every episode. It is just simply the power of knowledge of self and understanding what makes you tick and how you go about living the life that you're living. And then the last one, have confidence in yourself. I think we all give ourselves not enough credit. We can accomplish a lot of things, and maybe even more than we can believe in.
Mm-hmm. And you're never going to be able to pick just one, are you, Paul, for key takeaways?
I don't think I ever will. And if I do, good on me for allowing myself the flexibility to just pick one. But I think there's so many things that I take away from these conversations that I'm good with multiple. So it's all good.
Yep. Awesome. So we will keep digging into introspection and more about orientation in our next episode. Catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Career Boosters podcast. We hope you had a blast. Yeah, we know that's corny. Catch you next time, and remember to subscribe wherever you enjoy podcasts.